This is Sound Notion, the weekly podcast for new music and music news. I'm Sam Merciers.
I'm Dave McDonald.
I'm Nate Blyton.
And joining us this week is Chris Shultis. He is a professor of composition at the University of New Mexico. Has been affiliated for years with the John Donald Robb New Music Symposium that's run through there. Came to prominence in the 80s and 90s when University of New Mexico had a really awesome percussion ensemble. He was an active performer. Since then has become an avid composer. He's a noted Cage scholar, having a chapter on John Cage in the Cambridge Companion to John Cage, and has his own book about John Cage, Silencing the Sounded Self. And Chris also has a CD that is freshly out. I was going to show the actual CD on the camera. Chris, why don't you tell us about the CD?
Well, it's called Debbie Zadero, and of course I have lots of these with me, so does that help?
That looks great.
And it was released by Parma Recordings at the end of May.
Okay.
Excellent.
And how many, what are the pieces that are on the CD?
There are 4 pieces. The dates range from 1995 until 2007. The first piece that I composed on the CD is A Little Light and Great Darkness for soprano saxophone and woodwind quintet. Then there's Songs of Love and Longing for soprano and piano, which is the next piece in terms of when it was composed, from 2001 to 2003. Openings for winds and percussion, which I guess we're going to talk about on this program. That was from 2004 to 2007. And then the last piece on the CD, Debbie Zadero, for solo piano, was begun in 2004 and finished in 2007.
That's cool. We're gonna get to openings a little later, but haven't you had some performances recently? Why don't you tell us about what's been going on with that kind of thing?
Okay. Well, yeah, I guess the most recent one would have been a performance of Debbie Zadero, the solo piano piece at the that was part of the American Composers Alliance annual summer festival in June. It was performed by Falco Steinbach, who also was the pianist on the CD, at the Thalia Space. It's a small theater in the Symphony Space complex in New York City. That
Okay.
was in June.
All right. Okay, so we're going to get right into the news. Not a lot of stuff on the docket this week, although we start off with this is actually carried over from last week because I wanted to talk about the very snarky letter that letter to the editor Sondheim wrote about a new, I don't know what you'd call it, version, I guess.
Adaptation?
A new adaptation. They're doing their own spin on Porgy and Bess. Director Diane Paulus and playwright Suzan-Lori Parks, they, quote, punched up some dialogue, invented biographical details, added an upbeat ending. So, they made it a happy ending, kind of more in-depth character study in the sense of like modern television where you get 7 weeks worth of character development in 2 shows.
Right. And they also wanted to bring out the love story.
That's
because
right.
they didn't feel that the love story in the show called Porgy and Bess was obvious enough.
Right. So anyway, Sondheim wrote this letter to the editor, and he makes it clear that he has a bunch of valid points, but he's upset to the point that he's willing to take snarky pop shots at them from the very beginning. To begin with, I'm quoting Sondheim's letter here. To begin with, the title of the show is now, quote, The Gershwins, Porgy and Bess. I assume that's in case anyone who was worried that it was the Rodgers and Hart Porgy and Bess. So he's not wanting to have a conversation about this. He's wanting to let them know he's not happy with what's going on.
Yeah.
Yeah, so, I mean, I think maybe the first thing we need to talk about is whether we think this is okay. Is this like an acceptable thing to mess with Porgy and Bess?
Well, I don't know. I mean, to me, couching it in terms of acceptable and unacceptable don't really have much point. Some people are going to be okay with it and some people aren't. in terms of the way of what they're trying to accomplish, if it makes money, then it's perfectly acceptable because that's what they're after.
Right. And I think this is kind of the important thing for me is, while this is not, if I were in their position, the decision that I would make, I would not decide to warp add backstory to these characters in Porgy and Bess, which is one of Sondheim's beefs with it. And I wouldn't, certainly wouldn't change the ending to make it a happier ending. But they're certainly within their rights to do it. And I think we need to, especially for composers that are, been gone for a while, like George Gershwin, it's okay for people to make changes to their stuff, even for living composers. If somebody wants to take some of my music and change it around in some way, whatever, that's their prerogative. And it's also my prerogative not to try to go see this particular Porgy and Bess production.
Yeah. Do you think it's
you
okay
can make
for
arguments
you to...
all you want about, music theater is the artistic versus entertainment value of it, but you can't get around the fact that it's a huge entertainment business, and these people are probably going to be pretty successful in entertaining a bunch of ticket buyers with this show.
Right.
Chris, you're maintaining silence. What do you think?
I'm wondering about the question of authorship. I guess if they're going to include the Gershwins in the title, what does that mean in relation to the nature of the actual work that the Gershwins made themselves? That seemed to be Sondheim's point, is that how can you call this Gershwin's Porgy and Bess if you've changed what the Gershwins did when they wrote Porgy and Bess, and why shouldn't it instead be this person's Porgy and Bess? Why does this? I can't remember what is her name again.
Diane Paulus.
Yeah. Why isn't it just her Porgy and Bess? That seems to me to be Sondheim's complaint as an artist, which I guess probably I would share. I mean, if she's got to add the Gershwins into the title, then it seems to me like maybe it ought to be more about the Gershwins than her. But if she wants it to be about her, then have it be her Porgy and Bess, and then the controversy is over. But probably what Sam is talking about is also true, that there's a lot more cachet by throwing the Gershwins in there in terms of how it sells on Broadway. But I think it's a very complicated matter when you start thinking about the question of authorship in relation to this. And it seems to me like it's not enough Gershwin and a little bit too much somebody else. So if she really feels strongly about it, the story not being strong in certain ways, then she should make her own version and maybe find another composer to write the music too.
Right.
Well, I think she's perfectly within her rights to do that if that's what she wants. I think that and Sondheim hit the nail on the head. It's simultaneously invoking the Gershwin's name while modifying it away. Because the original was the Gershwin's version, right?
Of course.
Yeah.
And simultaneously migrating away from that while invoking their name.
Yeah. And calling it the Gershwins, Porgy and Bess, kind of makes it seem like it should be, more authentic than another performance of just Porgy and Bess. And this is in many ways much less authentic.
Right. It's almost like there's a missing pretext of an adaptation of the Gershwins.
Right. Right.
That would make more sense.
There you go. An adaptation of in front of.
Yeah. They just need to keep adding things on. So this is a staging of an adaptation.
It's funny, though, when I read this, I thought, this exact same conversation could be going on between, like, rival hip-hop artists or something, like somebody invoking someone else for cachet when, this seems like the same kind of conversation that can happen through a lot of different idioms. Yeah. Where you're banking on someone else's notoriety for your own advantage.
Gershwins aren't part of that conversation, where I think those hip-hop artists might weigh in.
Yeah.
That's true. That's the big difference, is that the Gershwins aren't around to speak up for themselves.
Yeah. And that's why Sondheim does it for them.
Sure, if you must.
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, anyway, I think we've beaten that horse dead. But I was glad we got to cover that because Sondheim doesn't pop off a lot with a lot of public remarks, and it was, I thought, pretty cool that he thought enough of that to say something about it. An interesting article that I didn't post to the doc this week, but I don't know who did.
Speaking of old fuddy-duddies.
A web page about the Met closes at opera's request. What was the name of the actual website that's now gone?
Met Futures is the name of the page, and
Met Futures.
It was a website where this guy, where's his name?
Brad Wilbur.
Bradley E. Wilbur, was culling together this information from all over the web and some other sources about the Metropolitan Opera's plans for future seasons, and we're talking 2, 3, 4, 5 years in the future, maybe more, and they usually only announce one season in the future, but people get really excited about what the Met's doing and when their favorite singers are going to be at the Met, and so this guy started pulling in this information where it would be published by, say, the singer's management that they've been contracted to sing whatever role from whatever opera in whatever year, and this guy would kind of piece together all this information from these different places and kind of figure out future Met seasons and future Met casts that the Metropolitan Opera themselves had not announced yet, and
which is awesome.
It's great. I think, and the Metropolitan Opera was starting to get a little upset with him because, of course, they want to be the ones to make the big program announcements. They want to say, hey, check out our new season, and isn't this great? But he was kind of stealing their thunder, I suppose, and they were apparently not very happy about that.
Well, I think, Dave, you probably know what I think about that.
I think what you think is a lot like what I think about that.
They're idiots for making that, or for requesting that guy quit doing that. Did you see how many comments? There's a link to another blog that talks about it, and on that blog, there are 72 comments about the fact that they requested he shut that page down. Now, it's funny that's not all of the comments, if you look through, some of them where they get on little side conversations about the actual programming of the Met. And they're discussing, I can't believe they did this, and I can't believe they did that, gossiping, and they're doing it based on data that they've always gotten from this guy. So when you read all the comments, it's obvious there's a community of people who are just very, very invested in, getting the sneak peek and everything, and it's a part of the way they enjoy it. And I don't understand why an organization like the Met wouldn't want a community of people like that out there.
And that's what the web does. It lets people form these communities and get really excited about their very niche thing. This is not the kind of thing that any normal journalist would have the time or inclination to put together and find out these future Met Opera productions, because there's not a big enough audience. That's not going to sell enough newspapers to make it worth it. But the web, there's a guy who's just doing it because he thinks it's a fun, he says in the article, and I think this is awesome, that it's a fun puzzle that he thought. He actually is a crossword puzzle maker as well, which is excellent. He's had something like a couple dozen puzzles published by the Times. But it's something that the web is great at, and that you can't duplicate in traditional media at all.
Right.
And the New York Metropolitan Opera should be embracing these people that are so enthusiastic and so excited about their product that they are trying to go way beyond traditional, press releases and try to figure out what future seasons are. They should think this is great.
Yes.
So
because I would be willing to bet that most, even people that actually go to the opera who consider themselves opera goers in New York, for instance, if you ask a bunch of them, I'd be willing to bet that the number of people who know about this guy and actually follow it is not that large. So it's not like they're actually spoofing it. He's stealing the thunder away from the big press release, affecting the people who the big press release is actually intended for anyway.
To be fair, though, most of the Metropolitan Opera audience doesn't have computers.
Or they don't know how to turn them on.
So how do you?
I'm a new Met subscriber myself, so I can tell you that we've got several computers over here. But
So,
I think you might be in the minority.
had you ever heard of this guy or his website?
I hadn't heard of it. It was the story was new to me when I read it in the Times. I was wondering though, and maybe you guys know more because you've studied it more carefully than I have. Do you think that there might have been trouble in the contract negotiations with the stars themselves, that it was causing problems because things were being discussed on this guy's website as negotiations were in process? That was the only thing I could think that might be problematic from their end.
Right, and that's the thing that I pulled out of the article as, I mean, yeah, the only, like you say, the only thing that might be a problem with all this data, all this information being out there in a way where, like, given time and given programs changing, that, like, it might just be weird publicity to be like, oh, you're singing with a Met. Oh, wait, you're not actually singing with a Met anymore. And I don't know.
Well, certainly
I think they need to get over it.
Yeah, well, all the artists and the Met want to control the message that they're getting out, but and I understand that they want to do that, but the guy wasn't like, he's not infiltrating corporate headquarters and stealing documents. He's just sorting through publicly viewable data and coming up with conclusions.
Yeah, that's what's interesting.
And actually a link in the blog that's linked from the main article in the Times. There's another link inside that blog entry to a PDF that talks about legal liability and blogging and all this kind of stuff. Basically, a lawyer posted it making the statement that he was well within his rights and wasn't doing anything that could be defined as legally wrong.
It might be annoying. I think might be as far as the Met was taking that, because it didn't seem like they were bringing down charges or anything. They just asked him to stop.
Right.
Right, and he acquiesced pretty quickly.
Yeah.
But I think, you know, we talked about the issues with contract negotiations and such, but I think that's just one of the things you have to deal with trying to keep a secret of any kind in a world where everybody is connected all the time.
Yes.
There just aren't as many secrets. And to be honest, these secrets aren't really that interesting.
And if you're a famous opera singer, there's a certain amount of, you know, your name is gonna circulate through the interwebs a little more frequently in certain contexts, and you're just gonna have to deal with the things that come of it. That's what I mean.
Well, it is interesting too, isn't it, that there isn't anything more aficionado-like than the genre of opera. I mean, people who love opera sort of automatically fall into that category, and this guy obviously is an opera aficionado, and I think what you guys are hitting on, and that you're right about it, looking at it from let's say a younger person's perspective, like the three of you, is that this is a new media issue, that old genres like opera and old opera houses like the Met maybe aren't really fully understanding because of that generational gap that definitely, I'm sure, still exists between the people that are running the Met and somebody like this guy. And I think it is it's sort of going across purposes. Somebody like him has got to be adding a lot of interest to people that are involved and care about that opera. And it's probably not necessarily the right decision to have made. You may lose something that you wanted to hold on to and control, like you guys are mentioning, but what you gain is probably a lot more interesting and helpful towards building opera audiences than what you lose.
Yeah, and I bet something like that will come back, maybe through their own website. I don't know.
Mm.
Well, you know, it's just interesting talking about art and artists and composers and the ones that we're talking about now. You know, like the artists and the performers that we're talking about now. The documentation of who they are and what they've done and all this kind of thing is going to be so different for people, you know, studying Chris Shultis in music history class or whatever 50 years from now. As an example, I was thinking Philip Glass has announced that he's going to write a memoir. And it's interesting to me because, you know, he's well documented. There's like a fan-supported blog kind of thing called Glass Notes, which is all the Philip Glass news. I couldn't find
all the Philip Glass news that's fit to print.
I couldn't find a Philip Glass blog, like if he blogs himself. But, you know, this is just one example of the huge wealth of data that's being generated both by the Glass camp and by his fans, which he has a lot. And now he's writing a memoir. Well, that to me seems like a totally different proposition in an age where there's tons of publicly viewable data about you everywhere, and you're going to write a memoir, you know.
Yeah, I wonder how much he's going to consult.
The memoir of a composer and learning about his life just seems like a different proposition now than it would have been in the past.
Well, I think the thing that you would hope to gain from something like this that you wouldn't get from third-party sources is just, you know, the inner workings of his mind, you know, what he's thinking about when all these things happened in his life and when he was writing whatever piece. And I think that's another thing that kind of gets replaced by personal blogs. We've talked about a lot of composers on this show that do great with new media and have their own blogs. We spent a lot of time a while back talking about Nico Muhly. Nico does great stuff on the web. He's got a blog and he writes not extremely regularly, but when he does write, it's usually pretty well thought out. And that's the kind of thing that I think is going to be really common. We're going to expect to be able to read what artists are thinking when they write the music that they're writing in the future for a long time.
Right, and you won't have to go to the library in the dusty section and pick out the collected letters of Mahler. You'll go
because the dusty section's where they keep all the composer stuff.
Right. You'll look at the collected blog postings of Nico Muhly from the comfort of your own armchair.
Yeah.
So anyway, having heard Philip Glass speak in sort of a biographical way, I expect the book to be filled with all kinds of anecdotal, funny little stories, because that's all he talked about. He was supposed to be talking about his music, and all he talked about was Nadia Boulanger and stuff like that.
It seems like he'll have some good stories, too. So
yeah.
It should be a nice read.
It seems like that's the kind of thing that I would expect from such a book, would be humorous little anecdotes that aren't particularly newsworthy. I guess that's the other thing you would get, not only their internal thoughts, but also the things that at the time wouldn't be considered newsworthy.
A lot of stuff that you were sort of expected, I guess, to cover in a standard memoir from 100 years ago was just sort of the biographical this, that, and the other. And, you know, I'm sure there's a Wikipedia entry for Philip Glass that we could look at right now and learn the particulars of where he went to school and all that stuff, you know.
I was actually looking at it as we were talking about it, because it is quite lengthy. And so anybody who has a fan base the way he does, you know they're going to have a big, probably accurate Wikipedia entry. It's also interesting that he's sort of like, you know, he and Steve Reich and others are sort of they hold the last throne on top of an ism, you know, before we get to the point where it's all pluralism and you know about everything so much that you can't. In other words, no movement like, quote, minimalism, I don't think is going to erupt again anymore. And he was the last one to be able to get on that bandwagon.
Yeah. I think certainly it will be something worth reading if it's well written, which you never know.
Oh,
but,
I'm sure
he'll have.
How are we doing on time,
some good
Dave?
stories. I think we should go ahead to the Holter.
Okay.
You want to take it?
Sure. From August 10th, Colin Holter, who is not a friend of the show yet, we haven't had him on, but we talk about his blog entries quite frequently. On New Music Box has the composer as generalist, which I found to be a very engaging topic.
Yeah.
Something that people who know me will know I talk about a lot and figure out how to deal with issue very much like this in my own sort of academic understanding.
Interdisciplinarity, I think is the
what's
word.
that?
Interdisciplinarity.
Interdisciplinary, right. The composer is generalist. He's talking about even just within a music department, that composition should be taught as a generalized skill that everyone should be engaged with. That's one of the points he's making. I don't know. It's almost hard for me to talk about this because it's so close to my heart. Dave, what did you think?
Well, it's so. First of all, I think you're talking about a little bit different kinds of journalists. Holter, I think, is talking as a journalist within music.
Right.
He's talking about somebody that knows their instrument really well, but also can write music. And I think one of the things he wants is to bring composition into the core of the music curriculum for people that are getting music degrees. They're not just sitting in a practice room with a bassoon for 12 hours a day. They're doing all these other things to become a more well-rounded musician, so that when they meet somebody at a cocktail party in the kind of cliched sense, they don't say I'm a bassoonist. They say I'm a musician, and they really mean it. They do all of these different things that encompass musicianship, as opposed to just playing the bassoon really, really well, which is important, of course. But I think it's not necessarily practical. When I am in school, I want to go study bassoon with a bassoon specialist. I don't want to go study with a generalist that kind of plays the bassoon, right?
Right.
So I mean, I don't know. It seems like a good idea, but it also seems like it's not. It would be very difficult to pull off in practice. And it also seems like the kind of thing that I would expect somebody that I personally would want to work with to do on their own. It doesn't seem like something that needs to be built into the curriculum.
So why, I guess, I mean, you mentioned that musicology, music theory, and bassoon are all part of a bassoonist's curriculum. And why isn't composition on the same level of musicology?
Because
music
it
theory?
hasn't always been that way.
Right. So that, I mean, I was on board with you for the first half of what you were saying of raising composition to that level, and then you said that it wasn't worth it because it would be too general.
I suppose that's a good point, actually, because we're the music theory that our hypothetical bassoonist is getting is not the level of theory that he or she would get, going for a theory degree.
Right.
So I guess having that in the kind of general education sense is a good thing. I take that back. You've convinced me.
But doesn't that also depend on what theory program you're talking about?
Sure.
For example, I did my undergraduate work at Michigan State, so I can use that as an example of something that you guys may be aware of too. But we wrote music in the theory courses. But part of the reason for that, I think, is because there were composers teaching theory, and that obviously influences how theory gets taught. And that's becoming less and less the case because of the so-called professionalization of theory instruction, which now requires PhDs in music theory in most places.
Right. Well, instead of composers, you get people who've published papers about music theoretical concepts that are totally disconnected from what's taught in freshman and sophomore theory classes.
Which is another problem, I guess.
I mean, I'm not saying there's a problem with theorists that go that far into it. I'm just saying, maybe it would be better to have composers or more performers teaching theory. I don't know.
Yeah. I mean, I think, though, the kind of composition that you do in a lot of theory classes is different from the model composition and creative composition are related, but I think distinct.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, that's a good point. That is what I did, was model compositions. That's right. When I did the theory classes, which is not, you're right, it's not the same thing.
I mean,
but I think
it's always really problematic, I think, with music instruction is the question of conservatory models versus, say, liberal arts models. Liberal arts models can sometimes be more useful to composers that are interested in a lot of different things. But then there are also composers who are specialists, and they fit more comfortably in the conservatory model. And so it seems to me like it's a pretty large subject that's complicated. I mean, I know for me as a young player, I just barely had enough time to practice and pass my theory and history courses. But
Right.
but I was practicing. I didn't. It was very hard for me to find time to do anything other than become as good a player as I could in a short period of time.
That's a very good point too. That
Yeah.
you'd have to lose something to throw some composition assignments into the mix.
Right.
It'd be at the expense of practicing or something.
Yeah.
Chris brings up well, he made me think of there's actually two big points in the article. One is that the way composers are being trained cuts down on their usefulness as instructors, or cuts down on their marketability, and suggests that if the system were more inclusive and generalized, that composers would have something to do because they would teach composition to everybody. But when Chris brought up the conservatory versus the conservatory versus the other model,
The liberal arts model.
What's that?
The liberal arts model.
Liberal arts. It brought up the one of the big parts of the article is just saying that if you're getting a doctorate in composition, you're probably not going to get a job.
Tell me about it.
Says Dave with the job.
But even if composition degree programs function inefficiently and don't adequately prepare students for the realities of workforce, the culprit ultimately may not be composition as a discipline, but rather specialization as an educational strategy in schools of music. So he's saying that, composers, we're producing all these composers who are no more likely to get a job than the thousands of violinists that the schools are also producing. If the schools taught their generalized music stuff differently, not only would it be better for the program, but it would give composers something to do.
Yeah.
Besides write music.
Right.
Well, I think it would require if a change in the way that we teach composition too. If everybody had to take composition, then I think becomes pretty impractical for every single person in a music program to take one-on-one lessons.
That's true.
There would have to be a proliferation of classroom composition, which isn't a bad thing, but I think it's limiting in some ways.
Well, and it also speaks to the fact that if you take music theory and bassoon instruction, those are both pretty quantifiable, and it's easy to identify an expert, and it's easy to mark someone's progress and evaluate how they're doing. And there's lots and lots of standard models for how to teach those topics, but composition is not that way.
Everybody's
A lot of composers will debate the teachability of composition as a subject. At the very least, it's from the point of view of evaluation, it's a lot more difficult than something like bassoon instruction or music theory. In other words, how do you tell how they're doing, and how do you teach it as a subject?
I got a question for you guys in this, and I won't belabor the point if you don't want to follow up on it, but I mean, my son's a visual artist, and he's going to art school, and he's about to graduate. He doesn't have any expectation of getting a job in a college or university. Isn't that maybe a difference too? I think that people who study in music schools, still many of them have some expectation that they're going to get a job, right? They're going to teach at a university or at a college somewhere, and that seems to me really different between, say, music and art. I mean, most visual artists think when they graduate with their undergraduate degree that they're going to work in a restaurant, and they don't have any expectation that their degree is actually going to get them a job. Isn't that maybe different in music?
Well, I mean, I can respond to that because I just got my master's and I had no expectation. I didn't want to get a job. Teaching.
So maybe it's changing.
Well, I mean, because I moved out here. I moved from what was pretty much my hometown to go somewhere where I could write music and practice performing and do that. And I'm looking for jobs at coffee shops and restaurants and any old thing. I think I applied to Best Buy. And
to be fair, Nate is a little bit more of a liberal artist than the average composer. I think you're more well-rounded academically and intellectually than most people coming out of school with music degrees.
And at the same time, I'm trying to take this time to really dig in and dive in to composition as a thing, to hone my skills in that. And that might be, or that's, I mean, obviously one of the benefits of being a specialist at something is that you really get much better or do something that's much more in depth with that particular field.
Right.
And
well, something that Nate just said about, or what you just said about interdisciplinarity and being a well-rounded composer to Nate made me think about, he talks, and Chris has been talking about it too, the sort of the liberal arts model. Not only does like conservatory model producing composers who are just specialized and are built to get those university jobs that, as we talk about on the show all the time, they're probably not going to get. I don't think most liberal arts, well, in my experience, liberal arts is still trying to figure out how to incorporate music, but more specifically composers, into the curriculum. Like, I spent the past 4 years trying to figure out a meaningful way to contribute to a liberal arts program, and it's difficult because of the way music is treated. Its ubiquity makes it ignorable as a legitimate subject in that learning environment, it seems to me. It's so taken for granted that treating it with a little more discipline is something that they won't embrace.
What do you mean treating it with more discipline?
Well,
just generally treating it as an academic subject worthy of traditional study with books and classes and
right.
Jargon.
Imagine a liberal arts environment where we're actually teaching the students composition as one of the things they can do as music instruction. They have, they'll have all kinds of, music instruction as far as like primary instruction on instruments, and they might have a little bit of music theory, but just because someone doesn't have an all-encompassing understanding of music theory or something like that doesn't mean you can't teach them how to compose. Given the tools that are available to people who want to make some noise these days, and as much as it might pain some people, you don't really have to know that much about what conservatories consider to be the things you need to know to be a composer. Those people can still be a composer. And to me, that would be a great way for a composer to contribute to the curriculum in a liberal arts environment. But most music programs don't produce composers that are fit to do that. They would discourage it, I think.
So if most music programs aren't creating people that are fit to do those things, there aren't any positions for those people either. So it seems like there's this mutual ignorance.
Yes. So we got to overhaul the entire system.
Let's start today.
Yeah.
All right, let's start making a plan. Chris, you're taking notes.
Yes, I have my notebook right here, Sam.
Right. We're founding a new music school right here, live on SoundNotion.
Yep.
So anyway, the Colin Holter article got quite a few comments, and anyone who hasn't done it yet should take a look at the comments, because it's obvious that a lot of theory teachers and a lot of composers read this and are contributing, and they have a lot to say about. Everyone's in more or less agreement that what composition programs are doing isn't that useful, and things need to change.
Yeah. Well, I think we're trying to change them here. The three of us that are here today, and Patrick when he's here, we're all doing this because this is one of our interests: is technology and web publishing and Web 2.0 communication in general. So I think people are kind of getting more interested in those things, but they're not being helped out at all by the university system. Mm-hmm. Would you say that's true?
I mean, we got a little help, I think.
We used the room for a little while.
Yeah. A little bit of funding. It was good. But
all
yeah,
right.
I mean, certainly haven't taken any classes on this. It's not a part of our education.
Yeah.
And
we read books.
Blogs.
So, should we close it out with the pick of the week?
Move on to the pick of the week.
Which is
Pick of the
Sam?
week this week is openings for Winds and Percussion by Chris Shultis, our guest. Chris, we're going to listen to the opening of the second movement
Oh, okay.
because it says the most in a short amount of time because we can't play like the whole thing.
Do you have anything you want to say before we go ahead and play this little clip?
No, go ahead. Yeah, just play.
All right.
Is that a samba whistle, Chris?
It's a piccolo.
Oh, what is the piccolo doing to produce that sound? Is it just a...
It's just a real high C.
Oh, wow. Hey, go for it. It sounds really nice. We should mention also this was recorded by the University of New Mexico Wind Ensemble, which is a great performing ensemble. That is correct, right, Chris?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, with Eric Grambach-Kender.
Right. Great ensemble, great conductor. I'd say this is one of my it's my favorite movement right now. The thing that we can't illustrate on the show because we can't play, I guess we could play an excerpt from every movement, is that every movement is pretty different. And what's further strange to me, in a good way, is that even within the movements themselves are short, and inside those short movements, there's sectionality in two of the movements where there's like a silence and then something that sounds, even though you can hear derivative material, pretty far removed from what came first, right? And the first movement is by far longer than everything else. So I was wondering if you could tell us any ideas about the big form as far as how it works, the four movements together, and some of your thoughts about form in that context.
Yeah, well, it's kind of hard to. It's funny because the more of a composer I become and the less of the teacher I become, the harder it is to talk about my music. Because I'm spending a lot more time writing now and a lot less time talking about writing. And I guess that goes back to the earlier subject. But let me just say, in order to stay away from that subject and go on to this one, which is in my own music, that I was thinking about form a lot. And one of the things I was trying to do as I was thinking about form is not let it influence what I wrote very much. One of the things that I remember writing at the same time that I was composing the piece was a concern that I had about listening, and so when I wrote the sketches for the piece, I did a lot of time walking in one specific location in the Manzano Mountain Wilderness in New Mexico. And so all of my sketches got written in these notebooks that you can see here. And then when I went back to actually write the piece down and notate it, I used those sketches and in a very traditional way sat at a piano and hammered out the piece. But when you talk about form, let me just say this. I thought of the piece in its entirety as almost like a 5/1 cadence. It starts at B flat at the very first note of the piece. The first movement is a B flat in crotales and flute, and then the last movement is as you know, if you've heard it, is going from that B flat into E flat major, Granger-esque type final movement called Ear, and how I got from that place, from the first note to the last movement, was really something that I think is very closely connected to how I walk. What I do when I walk is I start off like probably everybody does, with a mind full of ideas and thoughts, and then when I get to the point where the walk begins to work for me creatively, those thoughts are gone. You get exhausted. Sam knows this. He's taken some of these walks with me, and the physical exhaustion that's involved with walking for more than 3-4 hours eventually makes it almost impossible to really think, and instead you get empty. And I would say that was maybe the thing that influenced me the most when I started thinking about the form of the piece, is how it could stay formally empty. And I think if you're hearing it sectionalized in the way that you're talking about, Sam, then that means that I might have succeeded at that, because it means that maybe in terms of trying to find out what's the overall shape of the piece, it might be really difficult to do. But there are things that, as you may have also noticed, connect the movements, and they tend to be maybe more motivic,
yes,
or pitch oriented. So things come back, and when you get to the end, the last movement, I think, is the biggest puzzle. Is how did we get here? You know, how did I get to this E flat major chord? And that I really can't tell you. And I just knew in each of those instances, as I was writing each movement, and I wrote them in order, 1, 2, 3, and 4, just worked out that way. Is I just knew what to do from moment to moment. I knew that I go from here to here to here. And I didn't have any overall shape when I started to write the piece, except that I knew it was going to start at B flat and end at B flat. I wish I could tell you more than that, but that's about it in terms of the form of the piece. Other than it has one, I think we would agree. But how it came to be is really kind of a mystery even to me.
Well, actually, you brought up a topic that I think bears mentioning. You mentioned Percy Grainger, and I think we would all agree that the last movement, Ear, harkens very much of Percy Grainger in a way that I find very appealing, for the most part. Chris, I know you'd be disappointed if I didn't take you to task.
Absolutely, go for it.
There's actually, and I'm going to use the word dorky. There's one part that I find dorky, but I don't mean...
Man, rough crowd on SoundNotion this morning.
I think you know me well enough to understand when I say dorky, I don't mean it like a bad thing. I mean, it sounds sort of dorky, but as a, as a tool. The pentatonic scale buildup thing that happens in the last movement sounds very typical to me. Like I've heard it in band pieces a lot. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. However, the way it happens still manages to sound experimental to me. Like the fact that you're using that sort of really recognizable, tried and true sort of, I've heard this kind of thing happen in band music a million times. Yeah. Considering the context of the piece, and also probably considering you, to me seems pretty experimental. And we do get the payoff coming out of that because it hits the this sort of repeated, articulated line. The way it chops off rhythmically, it sounds like it's an edit or something, which is pretty cool. So I guess what I'm wanting to know is, like, were you, because there are moments in here where it sounds very familiar and, like stuff we've heard a lot. So you had to have been aware of that while you were composing it. I wonder if you have anything to say about...
Well, I will, but let me just say that what I said before and what I'll say now, I think has more to do with what I was thinking when I was writing the piece. Like what was I doing then, and in terms of when I hear it now, I'm not convinced there's ever really a good cause and effect relationship. I mean, so for example, I have these very extensive liner notes that were going to be on the CD that at the last minute, for various reasons, ended up not getting put in there, and I'm glad, because it would have pinned me down.
Right.
And I was thinking about that in relation to what you guys are doing here too. I mean, this is such an ephemeral medium, the internet, but it still pins us down. We're going to eventually be archived here, and people are going to actually be able to listen to this. And so I would just want to say it as a caveat. I don't think what I'm about to say now, and I'm going to answer your question, Sam, really has anything to do with the hearing of the piece. It instead has to do with what I was thinking about when I wrote the piece, and I'm assuming all of you guys are composers too, so this is a little bit of shop talk here. So I'm happy to say it. In that particular case, Sam, you're right. I grew up with band music, and I went to Interlaken, and my dad was studied with the drummer of the Sousa band, and this piece was dedicated to him. And Granger's one of my favorite composers. He's certainly, in my mind, the only great band composer. I mean, if you want to put it in a category of, as good as Mahler, I think absolutely Granger is in his own way one of the great composers of the 20th century. And the song, the piece is I think, Sam, you also know that was resonating in my head the whole time I was writing this piece is Granger. I think Granger's greatest piece, Colonial Song. And so there are spots, especially in that fourth movement, that are intentionally taken from Colonial Song as an homage, as something where I wanted to get me to the place where I was, walking in the footsteps of the person I think is the greatest, band composer. At that spot, the pentatonic thing you're talking about, without trying to bore your other listeners who don't know my piece. I was thinking about the end of Berg's opera Lulu, and there's a spot there where it's right after Jack the Ripper has killed Lulu, where the orchestra plays all of the notes at once. It's just stacked top to bottom, like just full of, and it's very dissonant, and it's a fantastic sound, and I was able to play the American premiere of the finished three-act opera that Friedrich Serha did, and Michael Tilson Thomas was conducting. And every time we got to that spot, it's just one of the scariest sonic moments. And the snippet of it that I was interested in trying to put in a band piece using band cliches everywhere in this piece. I understand that. You're right to pick up on that. I mean, I very intentionally took the band cliches. But because I am still, and always will be, I think, an experimentalist at heart, I thought, well, what if, the typical experimentalist question, what if I did what Berg did and put that into the band cliche of this stacking, like you always hear that, right? You hear that all the time. And I went from the bottom to the top, and I just had them all just keep playing it. But then at the very end, just have the glockenspiel just sort of take that tonic dominant thing and finish it off, like you say, just goodbye to all of that. And then I just decided to see what that would sound like, and also it had to do with the orchestration of it too, and what it would sound like to have all of this going on at once, and that's how it ended up there. It was literally a what if I took that pentatonic thing and I just had the whole every single player, every single part playing a different note. What would that sound like? That's how it ended up in that spot.
Well, I think that for me it works because, and the reason anything like that, any mention or sort of like tipping the hat to the band stereotypical sounds, to me doesn't bother me at the end because all the movements are so short. And this is something you and I have discussed a lot. It's easier to get away with lots of stuff if you're not going to pound 15 minutes of that into somebody,
Right.
To me, all those things, all those little mentions of the band style feel more like techniques. And, they come and go, and because 3 minutes and 31 seconds in the third movement, like that is, it's a perfect amount of time for that. Mm-hmm. So the way it sort of embraces a more popular music sense of timing for big sections, I think was notable, and it makes it, to me, seem very contemporary, even though a lot of the actual sort of harmonic and melodic or thematic material might seem a little more ingrained in the band literature.
Yeah, I was thinking of the band style as material.
Yeah.
The absolute last thing I ever wanted to do was write a piece in the band style. Nothing wrong with that. It's just not going to fit what I'm interested in when I think about my own work as a composer and about being an artist. But I mean, I think that I did, like I say, grow up with band music and that those kinds of things that you hear in all these sort of, in quote, stereotypical band pieces. I just thought it would be interesting to use those things as material and weave it into this piece and use that as kind of a connective thread too. Not formally, but in terms of its content, absolutely. Yeah.
I thought, to me, the last movement is really refreshing when it opens up in this sort of, chorale kind of structure after everything we've heard. But I was wondering if you could talk about the first movement a little bit. It's almost twice as long as the longest, second longest movement. And I know you wrote this one first.
Yeah.
I'm interested in the sense of timing through the first half of the piece, where it's a very simple piece of material that is played out in a very patient, deliberate, orchestrational, and sort of pacing kind of way. Pacing of that kind is something I have a strong interest in, because oftentimes when a composer does something that you really love, sometimes the only way to describe it is that guy or that girl has a great sense of timing. So I wonder if you could talk about the opening of the first movement a little bit in terms of pacing and use of silence, which is something I know you have somewhat of an interest in.
Yeah. In terms of proportion, like I say, the piece is through composed, obviously, and so when I was working on the first movement in particular, the opening few notes pretty much determined how long that movement had to be. I think. Now this is again talking as a composer making something. I wanted to have the possibility of isolating notes, so that when you heard those notes, you didn't just hear them as part of a compositional structure, but you actually had to pay attention to who was playing the notes. That for example, the first notes had to be a flute and had to be a crotale with the flute. But that sound is, I think, only possible with the combination of those two instruments. And the opening of that movement has that quality. So when the string bass comes in, I mean for me, it couldn't be anything other than a string bass. Or when the trombone comes in, it couldn't be anything other than a muted trombone. And so I was already thinking in terms of orchestration without ever having created any material. I just knew that I wanted to hear those sounds isolated so that it would be possible to be able to know what they were. So when you do that, you're kind of in a Feldman-esque place where you got to go slow. But on the other hand, I had absolutely no interest in writing a 2-hour band piece. And so then what happens next? And for me, what happened next is to take those notes and then to be able to then move that into some kind of motivic thing that would then give it the shape that it eventually has, which, as you know, then stops, and then this ostinato comes. Again, though, it's when I was writing it, I really was listening. I think this is maybe the most important thing I want to say, because I used to say this as a teacher, and now I do it myself. It's to me, a nice direction, and that is that. I always used to tell my students when they come in with a lot of material, I'd say, okay, well now, and they thought they had a finished piece. Okay, now listen to that material and see if it tells you what to do. And so what I was doing with the first movement of this piece, and then with all of the other movements that followed, was to follow my own instruction and listen. And what I did was write those notes down, those B flats, and I sat at the piano and just asked myself a simple question: now what? And I just followed it. And to me, this piece all comes out of walking anyways. It comes out of walking the same trail over a long period. And when you walk that trail, you begin to see the things that are there, and you begin to hear the things that there are to hear. And I think that's sort of compositionally how I'm working when I write music. You know, you have to start with something. So in the case of the Spruce Spring Trail, you get on the trail, you start walking. With this, I had those B flats in my head. That was really the only thing I knew at the start were those B flats, and those notes sat there from 2004 until I think 2005 or 6, before I started walking the trail of that piece. And then the more I listened, the more I heard, and then I just started writing it down. I think the pacing, you're right, Sam, determined the form. But it was really only because I was listening to it and just trying to follow the path.
Right.
I think we have to go pretty soon for time.
So Chris, what's new on the docket for you? What are you working on right now?
I'm working on two things. I've got a string quartet that I'm writing for the Del Sol String Quartet based in San Francisco, that will be premiered in March on my last composer symposium. And then I'm also writing a solo piano piece, concert length. They're preludes and miniatures. I've been working on this for years, but the middle section of it, which is called Las Blumenstrechen, or Let Flowers Speak. I have to finish that. I have to finish that this fall for an opening of artwork that my wife is putting together in Seoul. So those are the two pieces I'm working on for this coming fall semester. What am I saying? Fall semester. I'm done with fall semester. This is what I'm working on.
No more semesters.
So I just can't get rid of those habits very quickly. Yes, this is what I'm working on in the fall. Yeah.
It's going to be difficult to not live your life in 15-week bursts of activity.
Exactly.
Yeah, it's going to be a nice difficulty to get over, though. I'll tell you that.
Right.
Right. Well, Chris, thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate you taking the time and getting up a little earlier on a Sunday morning.
Yeah.
Not a problem. Enjoyed visiting with you guys. I look forward to. I enjoy this program. By the way, I've watched a few of them, and
thank you.
I'll be sure to keep listening and keep watching in the future.
Thanks. Chris's new CD is Divisadero, which is you can find links to places to buy that on our site. It's on Amazon and iTunes and all those good places. That's it for this week's Sound Notion. To read more about any of the topics we covered, or to comment on the show or the recording, head on over to soundnotion.tv/SN, and you can leave us a note there. You can also connect with us on Facebook and Twitter. Please take a minute, if you like the show, to subscribe on iTunes or wherever fine podcasts are available. If you like the show, we'd love for you to share it with friends or donate using the links on our site. Sound Notion's introduction includes music by Patrick Gulo, who we missed today, and video by Tyler Lepp. Thanks again for watching, and we'll see you again next week.